Welcome, everybody, to the No Bull, Just Bacon podcast. I am your host, Dr. Allan Bacon, and with me here today is Coach Beth to answer all of your burning health and fitness questions from around the internet. This is a rapid fire episode, and we have a ton of great topics to cover, so let's get rolling. From our Mighty Networks community, the first question that we have today is health benefits of nootropic supplements. These are the things that you see online like Alpha Brain, NZE, all of these different things that are intended to improve your mental clarity and focus. And that's really what these things are about. I mean, these are supplements that are intended to improve memory, learning, enhance focus, improve mood, give you an ability to deal with stress, neuroprotection for brain health. And they do seem to work under certain circumstances. And so I like talking about these types of things because, as many of you know, I have a background in professional supplement formulation, and I actually supplemented one of the best nootropics on the market, which I like to brag about from time to time because I think it is the most complete one out there as of right now. Controlled Labs Orange Brainwash. It is a great supplement for those of you that are looking for mental health benefits. And there's one thing that I do want to point out as I talk about this. I do not get any kickbacks for mentioning this. I'm not affiliated with the company. I work with Legion supplements. So even saying that this is the best on the market, I mean, you can understand that I'm coming from this from an area with no monetary interest whatsoever. But this is a really good supplement. And when you're looking into these brain type supplements, you want to figure out first if you are part of the groups that would actually benefit from taking these types of things. Because the reality is, if you're somebody that gets really good sleep, you don't have much stress, you don't have, all of those different things that add in from everyday life, kids, job, school, and you're coasting along, nootropics probably not going to be for you. You don't need the mood support. You don't need that extra clarity in times of intense stress. And stressors can be both physical and mental. And so what these supplements have been shown to do is increase things like mental reaction time, cognitive abilities, reasoning, especially under conditions where you are mentally and emotionally stressed. So if you find that you have situations in your life where you are drained from lack of sleep, from emotionally and mentally stressful situations that you're in, and even physically stressful situations that you're in, ingredients like tyrosine seems to work really, really well for people that are under intense physical stress as far as improving mental acuity. So if you're somebody that trains really intensely, if you're somebody that trains in sports such as triathlons, sports that involve a lot of running like soccer, this might be a good thing for you to put into play to get some of those benefits at the end of your sporting event. It can greatly increase your decision-making ability and speed at those time periods. So for those of you that are looking for this as a general boost, may or may not be the best thing. For those of you that are studying for boards in med school and finals and midterms and not sleeping, could be a really great thing here. What are your thoughts, Beth?
I actually used that nootropic that Allan formulated, Orange Brainwash, when I was competitively weightlifting. So I did Olympic weightlifting for several years, which is the snatch and the clean and jerk, and I competed at the national and international level. So I went to Worlds in 2019, and that was on meet day. That was my preferred pre-workout, if you will, of choice. I used to get an incredible adrenaline high during those meets to the point where my heart rate would really accelerate. So I didn't want anything that had a lot of stimulants in it, anything with caffeine, that would have been, I probably would have had a heart attack. But the nootropics in Orange Brainwash actually really allowed me to kind of create that Zen-like atmosphere, especially in the back room when you're warming up and lifting with all the other athletes around you. It's chaotic. You're watching them. You're getting nervous. You're getting anxious. And that really sort of allowed me to just kind of zone in and focus. And then after the meet is over, I never had any sort of crash where I would just I had an adrenaline crash from the insane adrenaline high that I had. But I never had any sort of caffeine or stimulant crash that you normally get with a lot of standard pre-workouts. I loved that. that formula. And I'm not really a big pre-workout person in general, but I do love nootropics. They work very well for me personally. I respond very well to them. And all of those ones that involve the focus component are really, really helpful. If you're somebody who is a little bit scatterbrained in the gym, maybe those are good ones to try to really help you zone in on your workout and focus and get done what you need to get done and then peace out of there.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want to touch on is the ingredient choices seem to be an important thing as well as the dosages. And
Mm-hmm.
so if people are looking for a little bit of insight into what ingredients to look for in case they're, deciding to build their own or shop around or whatever it is, some of my favorite ones that I include in these things are acetyl L-carnitine, Alcar, alpha GPC, theanine. Theanine is the ingredient where Beth is talking about not wanting this stimulant high when she is doing these competitions. And then maybe this is something that's important for you guys, particularly if you're taking this for studying, for work, for playing video games. You don't want to feel cracked out like a lot of those pre-workouts do. Theanine is actually one of those great ingredients that you can add in. And I actually had caffeine in Orange Brainwash. It was a small amount comparative to what most pre-workouts have, but the combination of the caffeine and theanine seems to have an additive effect. When we look at these studies that exemplify what these things can do, they have a synergistic effect that appears to be more beneficial than either in isolation. And so theanine tempers the energy effect of caffeine, and we intentionally want that in something like a mental focus enhancer. And this gives that kind of like a mellow focus type of energy. It doesn't calm you completely, but it kind of cuts out that noise on
Yeah.
the sides and it makes it less jittery. And this is one of the reasons that these don't have crashes when it's dosed correctly. And so if I'm looking at this from a dosing perspective and I want to give this to somebody who is trying to go really hard in the gym, I might dose twice as much caffeine as I do theanine. If I'm looking at this from how can we calm someone down a little bit? How can we temper that agitation that we get from high stimulant effects? If you're taking this semi closer to bedtime, sometimes this can help too. I'm not advocating taking any stimulants close to bedtime, but it does have an effect there too. I would do theanine in a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio to caffeine itself. And it tends to work really, really well there. Another thing that I would look into is something like rhodiola, which is a nootropic and adaptogen, and that is something that is very good for people that have significant amounts of stress in their life. This can lower emotional stress in a beneficial way. And again, are these things going to be massively beneficial for people that don't have any of these problems? No, don't go and waste your money on this type of stuff if you don't have any of the issues that we've talked about. But if you're living a stressful life, you need a little bit of a boost in some of these mental clarity pathways. It might be a good thing to look into. So we kind of beat the dead horse on that one, but there are some situations in which these are beneficial. And tyrosine is another one that I like a lot. 1 to 10 grams. Do not start off with very high dosages of that. It can also act as a little bit of a laxative if you do. And so start out with 1 to 2 grams and build up as you feel you're able to handle it. Please do not get any supplements that contain NAT, N-acetyltyrosine. N-acetyltyrosine is a newer version. I don't know why companies use this. It's more expensive than tyrosine. Tyrosine increases levels in the body 10 times more effectively, and it's cheaper. People like to use this because it seems new, and newer is supposedly always better in people's minds. So people will reach for this, and companies will try to do it as an ingredient because people think that it's newer, so it's superior, but that's just not the case. So if you're looking for a supplement or you're dosing this yourself, get regular tyrosine, and you will be doing yourself a favor, not only in your wallet, but in the effects as well. All right, next question. Explain the difference between lifting for strength versus hypertrophy like I'm 5. I thought that they were the same thing, and this still confuses me. This is very confusing for people for a couple reasons. One, training, strength and building lean muscle are intimately related. You cannot forever gain strength without gaining lean muscle. You cannot forever gain lean muscle without gaining strength. When we look at people like bodybuilders and powerlifters, they are usually the two people that are compared when we talk about barbell sports and this type of thing. Relatively, they're very similar in muscle mass levels and in strength. I know that insults powerlifters. and bodybuilders beyond all measure. It should not insult powerlifters and bodybuilders beyond all measure, but it does. And I think that it's very confusing to people because there is such a thing as specificity of training. If you're training to be really good at bench press, squat, and deadlift in maximal lifting, you're going to be better than somebody who is not. However, if you compare a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, both an elite bodybuilder and an elite powerlifter, there are much more similarities than there are differences if you compare them to Gen Pop. Because these things are intimately related, we see some really interesting things in the research. There are multiple studies looking at professional powerlifters. You can virtually, in every instance, take them into a body scanner, scan their body composition, and then they don't even have to compete. The people that have the same training, when you compare them, the people with more muscle mass are stronger, pretty much across the board. And it's really funny when you look at these studies and you're like, holy crap, like you can, with like a 97% accuracy, just put these guys in a body scanner. They don't even have to compete, and you can tell who's going to win. And that's because to be really good at a sport, you have to be the best. If we're looking at the elite, they've got similar body proportions. Like you've got the guys that have the right, hip width to be able to squat and deadlift correctly. They've got the right femur length to be able to be good in that. So they all have like similarities from the genetics, because you cannot change the genetic standpoint. So when we look at elites, we're looking at the top 2%. Anyway, so that we're cutting that error out. Then we're looking at, okay, well, if they've got similar training, so similar specificity of training and play, what is the determining factor of how they win? And it's typically the guys who have the most musculature. And powerlifters are very musculature. If you look at elite powerlifters, they got a lot of muscle. A lot of times you can't tell because they're covered up by some body fat, but they do have a lot of muscle. And similarly with bodybuilders, when you look at bodybuilders, you're not going to look at a top tier bodybuilder and see a guy that can't bench more than 2 plates. They can all bench a lot more than 2 plates. Now, maybe they spend most of their time in the 8 to 12 rep range, so they're not working 1 rep maxes quite as much as a power lifter. They're still incredibly strong dudes. And so the research backs this up very distinctly that these things are intimately related. Having said that, there are differences in programming because specificity of training comes into play, and what you train, you're going to be better at than someone who trains similarly, but not exactly that thing. If you take somebody out of their specialty, they're not going to be as good as somebody in their specialty. And so we do see differences in training. Now, for the large majority of people, do you need to worry about this? No, absolutely not. Because like I said, there is an intimate relationship between these two things. But if you want to be in the top 5%, you better prioritize your training to one or the other. Even for me, and I would probably say, Beth, I don't want to speak for her, but I would think that this is the case. We both train in a power building manner. And we both train in a power building manner because I'm not trying to be the best power lifter in the world. I'm trying to have a good body, but I'm also not trying to be the best bodybuilder in the world. I'm trying to be strong at the same time and live my life really well and have longevity and have strong bones. Well, you're going to build strong bones both ways, but I want to have all of the benefits that these provide. And so you can toe that middle road if you program correctly and progress really well in both. Really well in both, outside of I'm trying to compete with the best in the world at either. And that's where people get really confused. So when we talk about these things, there are a lot of similarities because of how intimately related these are, and there are some differences. The similarities include we have to be using progressive overload over time. That is the key principle for weight training and strength training in general. We need to be increasing our stressors on our body in some manner. And when people look at our coaching, we will typically program things like progressive, double progressions, where we give a rep range and then we tell you we want you to work within this rep range. And then once you start to get beyond this rep range, we want you to up the load, up the weight, get back down to the bottom of that rep range and cycle back and forth until the end of time. This is how progressive overload works. We keep certain things standardized because if you keep certain things standardized, you can monitor the changes in the other things. If everything is constantly changing, it's kind of a crapshoot and you cannot monitor the changes very well. So you cannot adjust when things aren't working. We keep things like tempo standardized across a training block. We keep things like rest periods roughly standardized across a training block. We might have some smaller changes within a confined realm of sets based on how people are doing. But load is the number one thing that we tend to progress. because it seems to work the best for both of these when you combine it. Rest periods seem to be very similar between the two training styles, and you're going to determine rest periods typically off of the rep range that you use. If we're doing 1 to 5 reps, we will often be working in the 3 to 5 minute rest range. If we're doing 6 to 15, we may be working in the 1 to 3 minute, depending on whether or not it's a compound or an isolation exercise. Isolation exercises tend to require a little bit less time for rest. And then if you're working greater than 15 reps or you're doing some kind of circuit or cycle style training, you could be resting less than 90 seconds. I would not rest like that for the majority of your work unless you're doing some kind of specialized sport that requires that. But we will have sometimes where we program a minute rest, depending on what it is. I mean, oftentimes we'll do this for like abs, maybe calves, maybe something that is a highly recoverable muscle group. And it tends to work really well. And then in higher rep ranges, that seems to work. The other two things that we want to keep in mind that are similarities. Range of motion is typically similar between the two. You're going to want a full range of motion, get that nice stretch under load. It tends to work very well for both progression of strength and progression of hypertrophy, which is why for the majority of our lifts, we program full range of motion. You know, when people are asking, well, I'm going to do a squat, how deep should I go? The answer is always as deep as your mobility allows that is comfortable, and continue to work on that over time. That will increase over time. It works very well to increase flexibility if you're doing that. And studies have shown that it works just as well as static stretching routines. So you do get a lot of benefits out of weight training itself because it will allow you to increase your flexibility over time just from doing that. And that's not to discourage people from doing mobility routines. That's just to say that the idea that people become stiff because of weight training just isn't true. And what's nice about it is this adds into that whole hypertrophy and strength building effect. And then the last thing that we want to look at when we're talking about the similarities between the two is both need to be trained in proximity to failure. What's interesting about this is that strength training seems to be able to train farther away from failure than hypertrophy training to get really good benefits. And that would be counterintuitive to most people. You would think that if you're training strength, you would need to go closer to failure and almost always be at failure, but that doesn't seem to be the case when we look at it in research. In fact, hypertrophy seems to need to be closer as a general rule. And so for hypertrophy, if you're beyond the beginner stage, training within 0 to 2 reps in reserve, so at failure or up to 1 to 2 reps in reserve seems to work extremely well for building lean muscle. If you're significantly farther away from that as an intermediate or advanced trainee, you're probably going through the motions and you may be maintaining more than you are building any lean muscle. You can be a little bit farther away in strength training and still progress. Now, I probably wouldn't be very far away. I would still be pushing myself because of how these two are interrelated. And if you're wanting to get those hypertrophy benefits as a powerlifter as best as you possibly can, because it's going to help your powerlifting, you're still probably going to want to work within 0 to 2 RIR anyways. Differences are a little bit more significant. The people who do the best in strength training tend to use much less volume in their training sets. They will typically do 15 sets or less in a single day. They will not do, and this is over all musculature, because they're typically in a strength-focused program trying to get specifically stronger at specific lifts. And so you train those lifts and you train them really, really heavy. You cannot usually do more than about 15 sets in an entire workout. And this can blow people's minds if they've been used to things like the muscle and fitness, muscular development workouts from the 90s, and even the things that ChatGPT is pushing out these days, since it pulls from muscle and strength workouts from the 90s magazines. That's where you're getting them when you get something from ChatGPT. These volume levels are extremely high, even for bodybuilders. And so for people that are just looking for pure strength, it's very, very counterproductive, because you're doing a lot of essential junk volume trying to push so many exercises into one day. And even top tier powerlifters, I mean, they'll only work out 3 or 4 days a week. They might do another day for skill type work, but they're not lifting super heavy for more than that. Now, you can get away with a couple more days if you spread volume out, but most of them won't do that because their sessions are not overly problematic from a recovery standpoint anyways, because the heavier weights, lower reps is easier to recover from than more moderate reps, lower weight. Hypertrophy. Hypertrophy has higher volume. They tend to work more in 6 to 15 rep ranges, 5 to 15 rep ranges, 4 to 15 rep ranges. It's a little bit different, whereas strength is usually 1 to 5 in for a lot of their main lifts anyways. Hypertrophy will stick to 2 to 6 sets per exercise, and tempo is a big thing, whereas tempo is not a thing typically in strength work. In strength work, you want to move that weight as fast as you possibly can. Even if it's really heavy and it's moving slowly, you're still trying to move it as fast as you possibly can. You're doing that with hypertrophy work on the concentric as well, but with the eccentric, the lowering phase, you're actually controlling it down. In strength work, you don't necessarily need to do that. You can, I mean, you see this all the time in power and strength work with Olympic weightlifting, and Beth can attest to this. You will see people power that thing up and then drop it from a top position because, one, it's dangerous to lower it slowly, and two, hypertrophy isn't the goal when you're purely training that strength or power movement. So with hypertrophy work, a controlled eccentric of 1 to 2 seconds is at least necessary on the vast majority of your movements. And I would do that because controlling it even a second has been shown to maximize that hypertrophic return, whereas if you're just dropping it, you're not experiencing that. Limits for hypertrophy, 3 to 12 sets per muscle group in a session, whereas this was up to 15 in just the entire session for strength. So you could have essentially double that, but I wouldn't do more than 25 sets in a day in hypertrophy work. And form tends to be a little bit more of a focus here. Although I got to say, if you're lifting super heavy loads without at least decent form, something's going to go wrong at some point. So I think that works out both with both sides. Beth, you have any distinct recommendations there?
I do not. No, you've covered everything very thoroughly.
It's a masterclass in programming we're going through here. All right, let's move on to the next question. I told you there were a couple questions that we saw from the group that were excellent questions. I was like, man, I could have an entire podcast just off of these 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's try to get to at least one of the other big ones. As an intermediate lifter who has never done a proper build, how long is ideal? Is it just 2 to 3 years of perpetual weight gain? That seems very daunting to me. And particularly for people that feel like they have to lose some body fat as their ultimate goal. What should I do? You want to start off with that one, Beth?
Sure. So it does depend on where you're starting from. If you do have body fat to lose, remember that body fat is metabolically protective. So you can actually lose body fat first before going into a build, which is what we would recommend for anybody who has a significant amount of body weight to lose first. Barring all of that, let's say you don't have any body fat to lose, and you want to immediately start a build. So if you're an intermediate lifter and you've never done a build before, I'm going to recommend at a bare minimum 8 months. And I think that's even pushing it a little low. I would push you closer to 1 year minimum to start, and then sort of assess along the way. It is not, I think people get afraid of builds. And part of the way that this question was asked leads me to believe that this person thinks that you need to dream or bulk, which is, this sort of goes back to like the old school days of bodybuilding where you would see bodybuilders eating like pizzas and cupcakes and ice cream for like every meal. And then they just get fat as shit. And then that's what people think a build is, right? They think a build is gaining a ton of body fat unnecessarily. Becoming
grossly obese at all costs.
Yeah, and become obese. And that's actually really not what a build is.
It's not a proper build.
That's not a proper build. I mean, yeah, you're building something, but you're probably also not building, you're not building a ton of muscle that way either. But I think that really scares a lot of people away from doing a proper build. And this is why you probably having a coach guide you through that is helpful. But, I usually tell my women who want to do this, and I've had a couple of women do a successful build with me. It is very difficult though, and I always am very honest with them up front about what they should expect. You do need to expect for the scale to increase. For women, women usually gain muscle and fat in a 1-to-1 ratio, not a hard and fast rule, but typical. So for every 2 pounds you see reflected on the scale, one of those is probably muscle and one of them is fat. That percentage will change obviously based on how new you are to lifting, or if you are a more advanced lifter, those gains are even less. But if you're talking about a year and you're talking about maybe 2 pounds of weight on the scale, 2 to 4 pounds of weight on the scale every month, you can do the math on the type of weight gain that you might expect during that period. What I will tell you is having women that have gone through this, when they get to the end of their build and they might be 20 to 30 pounds up on the scale, I get the same comment at the end of the build that says, I really don't look as bad as I thought I was going to look. Because typically, if you're talking about building muscle, you're building it all over. So you're not just getting like super big legs or a gut or super big arms. Like you don't look like this like amorphous kind of blob. Like I think people need to really
That's the political term.
yeah, distance themselves from like thinking that you need to get obese in order to do a build. And it's hard work because you do really have to prioritize your lifting sessions. Like lifting cannot take a back seat. It does really have to become the focus. Usually your volume may go up a little bit. The days in the gym might go up from 4 to 5. It just kind of depends on what your programming looks like. But I would recommend a minimum of 8 to 12 months, understanding that you do not and should not be becoming clinically obese in this process.
Yeah, I was actually writing notes because there's a couple things that I want to touch on here because I think that it can give people some clarity in how to do this. Because when someone says, let's go on a build for 8 months, you're like, great. Now I'm off on my own. I really do. I agree with Beth. You should get a coach because
Yeah.
I find that this is the hardest thing for people to do. And people
When
always,
you're gonna have to be talked off the cliff. I can't tell you how
at
many
month
times.
2 or 3, you're going to
Yeah.
have to be talked off the cliff. And then
You're
like
gonna have
literally
and
like every month after
multiple
that.
times.
Yeah.
Like it gets worse for my ladies at like the 7 to 8 month. People are ready to like fully throw in the towel.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think having a coach there to help, you can vent, we can calm you down, we can talk you off that cliff. I think that is money very well spent.
Well, it's an investment first off, but let me put things in perspective. You've probably never, if you're asking this question, you're really listening to this and you're trying to take something away from it. You've probably never done a proper build before. And so you have these goals that you want to achieve, whether they are health long term. I mean, we get men and women that want to increase their longevity. They want to improve their bone health. They want to be able to live really good lives beyond 30 because like all of a sudden everybody's like, when I turned 30, everything went to shit. Or when I turned 40, everything went to shit. Like those are the two numbers that people will typically give. The reason being, that's when activity levels really start to drop. Now, if you start to get into this stuff, you can counterbalance that. And if you start later, you can greatly improve on where you are. And so that's a really great thing. These builds are very difficult because you feel like you're looking worse before you look better. And the idea of feeling fluffy can be a very difficult thing. We call it fluffy because like not ripped doesn't sound good or not toned doesn't sound good. And so I think that people can really understand what we're talking about with fluffy. Now, if you have, as a woman, more than 30% body fat, or as a man, more than 20% body fat, from a health perspective, unless you've got a sport that requires higher body fat levels, I would recommend losing some body fat first. Don't go into a build. There's no reason to. You've got the body fat. What Beth was talking about, it's metabolically protective. You have the ability to actually gain some muscle while you lose that body fat.
Yep.
Now, once you are in 10 to 20% for men, 20 to 30% for women, which you can do by visual assessment. And if you've got any questions about that, certainly reach out to us and we can give you some images. And we talked about this last week. If you use the images and you're like, I can't tell where I am, you need to cut because you're probably above it. It becomes harder and harder to tell when you're above those levels, and that just means you need to get down into it. And once you get down into it, you can say, oh, that's where I am. Okay, cool. Well, now you're in an appropriate spot, right? So having some of those guides can be a very good thing. Saying that somebody should probably build for 8 to 16 months or whatever we want to say is true doesn't mean that you're in a calorie surplus 100% of that time.
Okay.
And I want to bring this up because people will listen to this, and maybe we haven't clarified that in the past. I don't think that I have, but I think that this is really important. A lot of coaches don't clarify this. There will be potentially multiple times on this journey that you are doing these building phases where you're saying, I'm focusing on my performance, I'm focusing on building lean muscle, I'm focusing on not starving myself to death, I'm focusing on actually becoming stronger. Operation Wonder Woman, Operation Captain America is what we're going into. There are times when you might be creeping up on that 20 or 30%, depending on your sex. Okay, cool. We'll go into a mini cut for 2, 3, 4 weeks. We'll go into a decently aggressive cut. We will up the protein. We will go into a cut. We'll get you down into better body fat levels, reverse and go back right into that build. It does not slow your build down. It is adjusting for these changes. So you do not do that dreamer bulk that we talked about. You do not do that thing that turns you into that fat blob that you were worried about. You actually do this in a smart manner. And then you can say, oh, I can control this. This is okay. And it's funny when you talk to people about this type of thing in the beginning, because before you've ever been into a build or ever tried to, I feel like Gen Pop thinks that building is a super easy thing because they misconstrue gaining weight for gaining muscle appropriately. It's super easy to gain weight. That's not in question. That's different than builds being harder than cuts. Now, it is individual specific. So if you tell me that a cut is a lot harder and I've actually done builds, I cannot argue with you. I can just say from experience with a lot of clients I coach a lot of coaches, and nearly every coach agrees with this. Builds are tougher. Mm-hmm. Builds are tougher because you tend to look worse before you look better. People don't value performance as a sign of progress as much as they value drops on a scale or looking better in a mirror. And that's understandable. That's the way that it is. So what we want to do is we want to educate you so you can take this stuff back and finally get off that diet roller coaster, finally get off of feeling frail and having 1,200 calories as what you have to be in a cut. I mean, building this muscle, becoming healthier is what allows you to still cut. I've got people that cut on like 1,900 calories. And their days are filled with the foods that are typical American diet, and they're okay. But they've built up over time to be able to handle this. They've built up their step counts. They've built up their lean muscle mass to facilitate this. So focusing on performance is one of the most important things that you can possibly do when you switch into these building phases, because I guarantee you that focusing on the mirror and focusing on the scale is not going to make you happy. It's not going to make it sustainable unless you're a super skinny dude to begin with. And I can commiserate with those dudes because that was me. That's why I got into lifting. I was 6'1", 165 or 170 pounds in high school. That's very light. I was a very good distance runner. I'm not a very good distance runner anymore. I will sprint. If you outrun me, you're safe for at least a time period before I catch up. The people who do really well in this focus on performance. And I'm gonna give you, this is the Allan and Beth secret to surviving a build really well. Get a second set of clothes. Get a set of clothes that are for the build itself. You are not going to feel happy pulling yourself into jeans, feeling like a sausage getting rolled into a casing. It doesn't work out that way. It's not great. Yeah. Having a second set of clothes does not mean that you're failing. It does not mean that you're doing anything wrong. Save that set of clothes because you're probably going to go back into a build later at some point in your life, because we cycle between these two things pretty often. You're going to feel more comfortable. You're going to feel less like things are going in the wrong direction. And I know particularly, well, I'm going to go out on a ledge here. Beth, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think particularly women have issues with this, because if you're not at like a 2 or a 4 or something like that, you feel like you're failing or there's less worth in your life. And this is not women's fault. This is society drilling this type of bullshit into you. Men, if we get a bigger shirt, we're like, that's my shoulders. Even though it's not our shoulders, it's our gut. We're like, yeah, that's my shoulders. And we can play it off that way. Women can't do the same thing based on what society has taught us. So for women, I have found, at least with my women clients, telling them to buy a clothes size up or 2 can feel defeating. And I don't want it to feel defeating. I want this to be Operation Wonder Woman because it's a very important thing. So let us give you some of these tips, and I want to give you some distinct markers to be able to follow to see if your build is working in the right way. I want to give you some numbers because saying, hey, just gain some weight and it's going to be fine is absolute bullshit. That's not active. That's not actionable. I mean, that is not something that can be very helpful. So we talked about building we talked about programming and the way that you look at some of the programming protocols for hypertrophy and strength and all that. I think that that's great because that's actually a segue into this. You have to be following those first. If you're not following those, if you've not gotten your intensity down to where you're working within that 0 to 2 reps in reserve, you probably shouldn't go into a build. Unless you're a rope beginner, in which case you can go into a build. It'll be fine because even if you're like 5 off, you'll still gain. But for people that really want to build lean muscle, you have to be in that intensity range or you will be wasting those extra calories. That's when the body fat starts to add on. And you're like, well, why isn't this working? You know, Allan told me if I did this and I followed that rate of gain and all this stuff, that this would work out. That intensity is really one of the big missing points between lifetime intermediates and people that really get super proud of where they are and feel like they've really achieved what they wanted to achieve and far beyond. That intensity is key. Once we get that stuff down, I think monitoring rate of weight gain by the month is a really good sign of success. If you're a beginner, adding 2% of total body weight within a month is a good range. If you're intermediate, 1%. If you are advanced, 0.5%. As you become more advanced, you will add less weight because you have less ability to add on significant amounts of lean muscle very quickly. The more advanced you are, the less you gain. That's okay because you've leveled up. But understand that that rate of weight gain outside of the first month that you go into a build, that first month you're going to, especially if you've been cutting, you're going to jump up in weight pretty quickly because you're going to have water flux that comes in play. You're going to be taking in likely more carbs. You're going to have more muscle glycogen. So all these things weigh something. Food weighs something. So seeing a jump of like 5 or 6 pounds in the first 2 weeks, even in women, is not surprising. I don't flinch at it at all. Like when I have clients that switch from a cut into a build and want to do this, I don't even blink at that. They're like, I just gained 5 pounds. I'm like, I don't care. Let's see what happens over the next 6 weeks or so. And then we will start to adjust because we have our sign of success tied to the scale so much that we don't realize that there are other things in our body that have weight other than muscle and fat. We think of our body as just muscle or fat. So when we see changes on the scale, that's what we think it is. There's water, there's food, there is, shifts in a bunch of other different things, muscle glycogen that adds weight and can add significant weight. And particularly for those of you that are first starting to train, you're going to see a really cool effect. If you've never lifted weights before, when you first start training, you are not used to the body being primed to shuttling glycogen and glucose into your muscles. That's the pump, that residual pump that people have. This is also why women think when they first start training, and this sounds sexist, but please, Beth, cut me off at any point if it ever does. Women in particular, particularly women that are our age and older, just traditionally had not been gym goers. That's just the way that it was because when we grew up, we were never told, hey, girls, get into the gym. It's awesome that it's happening now. It was never a thing in the past. And I love that women are smart enough to have seen the evidence and they're like, shit, I should be doing that. And so we're seeing this happening. The problem is we have experiences that don't match our level of knowledge at this point. And so what happens with a lot of women is they'll go into the gym, they'll start lifting for a week and they'll be like, I'm becoming the Hulk. And what they're not realizing is you're not gaining a ton of muscle in 1 week. What's happening is you're getting a pump for the first time. You're seeing the pump. Your body is shifting its processes. This actually happens. When you don't lift, you can hold a certain amount of glucose in the muscles. Once you start lifting, this becomes a recurring thing. You can hyper load your muscle, your skeletal muscle, with more glycogen. This is cool in the effect that you can now eat more carbs and it doesn't go into fat. It's bad in the fact that if you don't know what's going on, you are now holding that in your muscles like you've never held it in before. If you stopped working out, it would go away. You're now thinking that you're gaining muscle like the Incredible Hulk. This effect slows down and stops after 2, 3, 4 weeks. It doesn't stop. It levels out. You continue to hold on to that as long as you continue weight training. But being concerned of, oh, I'm going to just balloon up in size doesn't happen because this is a visual effect and not skeletal muscle is coming on at some massively increased rate. And so when we see women say, oh, I gain muscle way too easily, it's probably the effect of you're noticing the pump for the first time. And then you stop training because you're worried about it. And then the next time that you train because you hear it's good for you, you balloon up again. And then you stop training because you're worried about it. And this is this endless cycle of thinking, okay, well, I've gained all this weight. So if you know what's happening here, you can become a little bit more comfortable with that. But what's cool about these building phases when you first go into them is, yes, you can have a significant increase in weight, particularly if this is your first time weight training, because now you're holding much more muscle glycogen than you've ever held before. It's scary. But hold on for those first 4 or 6 weeks because it's going to level out. And then the rate of gain that you see will be what I talked about before, where you want to stay in that 2, 1, or 0.5%. Then it becomes okay. That is something that you will be able to monitor over time. That first month, it's going to throw your whole mind off. The same thing happens when you're cutting. You'll see these like 10-pound drops in some people in the first month. And they're like, yeah, I'm losing like 8 pounds a week. This is awesome. It's working really well. And then all of a sudden, after the first 4 to 6 weeks, they're like, now I'm only losing a pound. And they get really deflated. They were never losing a lot more than that in body fat to begin with. They were losing more weight because they were shedding that water and muscle glycogen. But this whole shift in weight can be a very, very confusing thing for people if they don't know what's going on. So hopefully this elucidates that a little bit for people so they can start to focus. Now, the other thing that you have to keep in mind, and why I like to talk about this in monthly intervals rather than in weekly intervals, is one, in a week, your water flux can happen so much that anything that you see within a week is suspect. You cannot tell a trend within a week. For women, particularly women that are having their menstrual cycle, it's better to compare 4 weeks apart rather than 2 weeks apart, because what happens when you're bloated at one point in your cycle and you're like, I gained weight, I lost weight, I gained weight, I lost weight. Like it just kind of goes up and down all the time if you don't really know what's going on. So doing these 4-week comparisons is better anyways. And once we're outside of that flux period in the beginning, looking at these 4-week intervals for men and women can be very telling. If you are consistent and adherent with your training and consistent and adherent with your diet, if you're all over the place with your diet, you're going to be having massive shifts because of different sodium intakes, different carb intakes, all that kind of stuff. So this does take some consistency, but what you essentially track and control for, you can manage. So if you've tracked and controlled for these types of things, and you look back over 4 weeks outside of that beginning flux period, and you say, ooh, I gained 4%. I'm a beginner. That's twice what Allan said. Maybe you should dial that calorie surplus back a little bit. But that's how you can do this and be comfortable with being a little bit fluffy and saying everything's working the way that's intended. And so this is a really great way to be able to do that. And so I hope that some of these little ancillary guidelines can help people, because it can cut off so much stress whenever you're going into these builds that tend to be the hardest thing for people mentally and emotionally. Anything I missed out on there, Beth?
Nope.
Okay, next question. Man, we're getting to the least number of questions that we've ever gotten to, but this is a good conversation. And I think that we're giving a lot of good insight here for people. Why is there a huge trend for creatine for peri and menopausal women? I know it's good, but I am suspicious. You are right to be suspicious of people that push supplements. Having said that, we just did a nootropic topic. So way to put me on blast there. Why is there a huge trend for creatine? There's a huge trend for creatine in peri and menopausal women because it can sell something. But this is one of the few that I actually don't disagree with as a general recommendation. And so when people recommend these things, I don't look at them and say, man, that's a grifter. If they're recommending this, and then they're recommending that you take, their curcumin supplement, and then this supplement, and then this supplement, and then they're all like 300% markup, that's a different story. If they're saying, yeah, go to Amazon, find the cheapest one that you can find, go with that, I like that. They're on point. That's fine. And I'm okay with that, because particularly in the case of creatine, because there are so many benefits. Why is it recommended for peri and postmenopausal women? Probably because there is potential for things like bone health benefits. And I know that it's a cool thing for researchers these days to say that it doesn't increase bone mineral density. And they're 100% right. It does not. But there is some research out from labs that suggest benefits to bone morphological changes. including increased interior posterior thickness in things like long bones. And this can be an aid to fracture resistance, regardless of the benefits to bone health in a population that is potentially susceptible to bone fracture because of osteoporosis and osteopenia. There are a lot of other benefits to this. I mean, there's undisputed strength benefits to creatine. I mean, nobody argues that there are strength benefits to creatine. What happens if you take a peri and postmenopausal woman who has never really taken care of herself before, you give herself that little bit of extra strength that she needs to not fall down the stairs when she made the wrong step, and then she doesn't break her hip? And we're doing it for a supplement that makes no money for the people that are recommending the supplement, unless they're putting a huge markup on it. And some people are putting a huge markup on it. But the majority of creatine supplements on the market don't have a huge markup unless they're like an alternative form of creatine. So please get creatine monohydrate. You don't need to get a special creatine hydrochloride or whatever that is. There's no other benefits to these other forms. But people don't make a ton of money off of this creatine supplement unless it's marked up. It is a supplement that has half a dozen benefits proposed. And even if the bone benefits don't pan out with further research, it could not, because of the fact that there's no bone mineral density support suggested there. We could pan out that it doesn't do anything, but the rest of these other benefits are there, especially the strength benefit. There's like no side effects to it. It costs next to nothing to purchase. Should peri and menopausal women be taking it? Yeah, I would say yes. Should everybody age 18 to 98 be taking it? Yeah, I would say yes. Even if you don't work out, I would say yes. And so this is one of those few things that when researchers and some coaches get on and they're like, yeah, you know, you don't need any supplements. No, you don't need any supplements. You're still going to progress really well without them. Are there a handful that probably provide benefits, particularly under certain circumstances and for some specific benefits? Yeah, there are. And this one has more wide-reaching benefits than most. And so that's why when Beth and I talk about supplements, and even if you look at our recommended supplement section in our Mighty Networks community for the people that are in our group fitness training, or for the tailored plans that people get in our one-on-one, you will always see some overlap. And it's because those are the supplements that we feel have enough evidence that they work in the majority of people. Magnesium is one of the most it's one of the ones with the highest amount of people just not hitting their daily needs, even from just regular foods. Magnesium, vitamin D for people that don't get sun, creatine, protein. Protein supplements can be very helpful. Are they necessary? No. If you can get it all from food, or you prefer getting it all from food, please do. It's much better to get it from food than a protein supplement. Does everybody like eating that much protein in a day? Most don't. And so we still recommend it. Creatine's great. Fish oil seems to have a lot of support for a wide-ranging amount of benefits. If one or two of them don't pan out, cool. The rest could. And we see some very good research as far as that goes when the proper methodology is employed. So there's going to be some that I'm going to recommend, and I'm not going to apologize for recommending. I'm not going to apologize for recommending any of those. You know, if there's an influencer out there that's like, you should never listen to anybody that recommends supplements, it's absolute bullshit. I don't agree with that at all. If you cannot afford them, and you're like, Allan, you recommend these to everybody, but I can't afford it, don't buy them. You can still progress very, very well. Control what you can with your nutrition. Nutrition and training always take first seat. Supplements are just that. They're there to supplement your diet, but they can be very helpful under the right circumstances. And even doctors recommend things like iron supplements for menstruating women. There's a reason that doctors do that, because it can help that population. Your athletes that can benefit from having stronger bones, vitamin D if you're not getting enough sun. Your athletes that can benefit from improved cardiovascular effects. Your athletes that can benefit from strength, from creatine. So I'll recommend it, and I'm not going to feel bad about doing it. And this is essentially like a soapbox that I'm getting on, because I've seen so much kickback about this type of stuff in the recent year. But I want to be very clear on where I stand on those things, and why I don't recommend, you know, as a standard, oh, you all need a pre-workout, or you all need methylene blue, or you all need these other, urolithin A, or these other bullshit supplements that don't really have any backing in humans. We don't recommend those. And so we look specifically for the data in living humans that can benefit from these types of things, and we'll recommend those. And if you have the extra money to be able to get into those, absolutely do it. That's what we take. We would never recommend anything that we don't take. And so I think that can be a very beneficial thing. So for being suspicious of people recommending supplements, particularly for a population, yeah, that's a good idea. You should always be suspicious. You should also always be critical, but then ask the people why they're recommending it and listen to feedback from multiple people and then make the decision for you. Because as an adult, you can make the right decision. You can decide whether or not it's worth your money. And these ones are at least ones that aren't going to break the bank. It's not an AG1 that is going to provide absolutely no benefits and still cost $120 a month. Avoid those types of things. Anything to add to there, Beth?
No, sir.
All right. Will wearing lifting gloves limit improvements in grip strength? They can. The issue with lifting gloves is I'm not anti-lifting glove. The problem is you can't grip as well with them. Your hands get kind of sweaty underneath. They shift a bit. People typically wear lifting gloves because they don't want calluses on their hands, but I will steer people away from lifting gloves because there are better ways to take care of calluses on your hand than lifting gloves that don't have negatives. So if there's something that I can tell you that solves this problem and has no negatives, whereas lifting gloves have a potential negative on top of costing some money, I'm going to do that. So calluses are usually the concern here. I can't think of another reason why someone would wear lifting gloves. They're not going to improve your performance. If you need wrist support and your gloves have a wrap, get wrist wraps.
Get wrist wraps.
Yeah, because they work and they're great. Lifting gloves, because they shift so much, they don't allow you to grip as well. And so when people first start lifting, they wear them and they're like, this is more comfortable. This is great. You haven't learned to really push yourself to that 0 to 2 RIR that we talked about. Man, that was a great opener for this episode because we talk about it so much. So once we start pushing you towards that, your grip is going to start to go when you're really pushing yourself, right? And we know even for beginners, you're eventually going to get to that point. So we want to start training you in the right way from the start in something that will only have benefits. Calluses are a big concern for people that start lifting, and rightly so, because when you don't take care of calluses properly, they're a huge pain in the ass. So learning to take care of them is a very important thing. The best thing that you can possibly do is get a pet egg, those things that are made for shaving off those terrible calluses on your feet.
They look like cheese graters, essentially.
They are cheese graters.
Yeah.
They're literally cheese graters made for your body.
Cheese graters for your hands and feet.
Right. Take that and shave your calluses down, and then moisturize your hands before you go to bed.
You can even wear gloves to bed if you want to, like I used to when I was doing CrossFit.
Oh my God.
Alan used to call me Mickey Mouse because I used to wear
white gloves. They looked like Mickey Mouse gloves that she would wear to bed. She essentially had like this whole gear set up over time.
Your girl was moisturized.
She had white gloves. She had her mouth guard. She had her bonnet now, and she
had my bonnet on.
She had a robe that looks like a Jedi. I'm like, what is happening here? So like you can tell that you're outside of the dating phase and you're really married when this starts to happen. And I'm like, what the hell is happening? So these pet eggs work really, really well. They take 2 seconds. You literally just shave it across your hand and then dump the scraps away. This prevents those calluses from building up into that hard, like rigid points that tear when you hold on to bars.
Yep. And you do not trust me when I tell you the reason that I used to like wear gloves and stuff like that to bed. Everybody knows CrossFitters. We do a ton of barbell work and we do a ton of work on the rig with gymnastics. So high rep, high volume pull-ups, that kind of thing. And our hands just get absolutely murdered pretty much on a daily basis. So I used to shave my hands down. I used to do it about 2 to 3 times a week. That's how often the skin would actually start to build back up. And then at night before bed, I used to put Vaseline actually across my calluses and then put gloves on. Because keeping them moisturized is actually what keeps them from ripping. But I will tell you, from having ripped calluses in the past, it is one of the most painful and miserable lifting injuries that you can have, because once you're ripped and torn, that's it. You can't hold on to a barbell, you can't grip a dumbbell, you can't do pull-ups, you can't do lat pull downs, like literally anything that you need your hands for in the gym, you now cannot do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a nightmare.
Well, and if this works for Olympic weightlifters and CrossFitters, it's 100% going to work for you as a power lifter
I
or
used
a
to I used
physique.
to shift I used to shave them even more when I was Olympic weightlifting.
Yeah, I mean those are the
All the
two
barbell
types of
ones.
lifting that'll hit this more than anything else. I mean,
Yeah.
strongman maybe,
Yep.
but people that are doing this for physique, for health, for strength, you're not even gonna remotely test this. I mean, I have to shave my calluses once every like 2 months, and I don't wear gloves to bed.
I
So
still do mine about once a week. I don't wear gloves to bed anymore, but I do still shave
I
mine down
I
once a
still
week.
have my integrity. All right, let's do one more, and then we will say good night on this one. Does strength training elevate ALT and AST levels? These are liver enzyme blood tests. Does strength training elevate them? The answer is yes, they can. Yes, it can. Any intense exercise can elevate these liver enzymes for up to 48 or maybe 72 hours. I think it's 48 post intense exercise. And so, one of the things that we unfortunately see under these conditions is that most primary care physicians are not used to working with athletes. And so, you will start a weight training program and you will go in and get a blood test, and they will freak out about the fact that your blood urea nitrogen content is up, your ALT AST is up, your creatinine is up. And they're like, oh my God, you're dying. And every one of these things can be explained by a healthy lifestyle, which is hilarious because these blood levels are tested on Gen Pop, who does not lift weights or exercise. So these reference ranges may not be appropriate for you. Now, I'm not saying that if you have an elevated level that you completely ignore your doctor. What I'm saying is have a discussion with your doctor, bring up, if my ALT AST is elevated, could this be due to my exercise? And first off, make sure that you're working with somebody that actually works with athletes. That looks like they know a little bit about that, because this is not taught in med school. Is my ALT AST elevated because I had an intense exercise session recently? Is my blood urea nitrogen content elevated because I eat more protein than the standard American diet, which is basically devoid of protein? Can bun be elevated because of protein intake? 100% it can. And what will typically happen with any of these elevated things is they will say, I'm not sure, we're going to retest in 2 or 3 months or whatever it is. That's completely cool if a doctor says that, because actually that's probably them doing their due diligence and saying, well, let's retest. And if you come back in 2 or 3 months and it's either gone, which happens a lot of the time with the ALT, AST or the bun, I see bun go away a lot after giving some months of getting used to a higher protein content. It'll either go down and they'll say you're fine, or it will stay at the same level and they'll say this is your baseline.
Your baseline.
And not worry about that. If it continues to rise, then something is potentially wrong, right? So, this is the way that you figure this out. If creatinine is raised and you take a creatine supplement, it doesn't bother me as long as it's not really that high. That happens. It's been shown in the research to happen. If
and
you're
it can pair up your EGFR as well, because remember that happened to me.
Yeah.
In North Carolina, my EGFR was low. And they wanted to do like all these like kidney they wanted to biopsy my damn kidney over it. And
because she was taking creatine. They wanted to biopsy her kidneys. And so this is something, I'm only mentioning these things because these are the most common blood tests that you will see elevated based off of the things that you would be doing in a fitness and health journey. So if your creatinine is slightly elevated or your EGFR is slightly off, tell your doctor, I'm taking creatine. As a supplement.
And that can also be a high protein diet as well, because you're essentially shuttling more protein through the kidneys.
Yeah.
So all of that will have to be taken into consideration. My doctor, luckily, was cool about it after showing him the data on creatine and all that kind of stuff. But it's just to your point, a lot of that stuff just isn't taught in standard med school. So it's.
Well, I mean, it's either not taught. It wasn't taught when I took those courses. It either wasn't taught or it gets glossed over pretty hardcore.
And it's also probably something that they don't run into.
You don't run into it that often. No, you don't run into it that much.
It's not something that you'd remember easily.
Right. So these are some of the tests to look into. These are some of the questions to ask your doctor if you have these elevated. If it's a major elevation, that's something different. But if you're, not extremely high off of the reference range in the blood test. It's likely a non-pathologic rise. That's what these are called. It just means that you're doing something different than what Gen Pop does. And you should be, because it's healthier than Gen Pop. And so you're doing something that's different than what they do. So we cannot expect you to have the exact same blood reference ranges in certain things that these affect. Now, the good news is, because these are non-pathologic, that also means that they don't actually stress these organs. ALT, AST is not stressed. Your liver is not stressed from this exercise. In fact, your liver is going to get a lot healthier from exercise and eating right. Your kidneys are not stressed from creatine intake or higher protein intakes. That's just not the way that it is. Your doctors can be confused about this, because if they take a nephrology course, in nephrology courses, they teach you that these references can be raised, and that amino acids like protein and creatine can damage kidneys if they are already damaged. If your kidney is not functioning correctly, having too many amino acids in a diet could be a cause for concern. It has never been the cause of problems. And this is pretty clear in the research. Protein from food, from supplements, creatine has never caused kidney damage in an otherwise healthy kidney. People talk about liver for some reason with creatine. That's never even been the case, because it doesn't even raise liver values. But these are the things that people worry about. When you have a doctor who is not used to working with these people, they think that it's stressed, and it's not. This is a normal function. Your body is clearing this just fine. Okay. All right, everybody, that is it for our podcast today. Thank you so much for listening. Please submit your questions via Mighty Networks, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, anywhere that you can find us. And thank you for listening to another episode of the No Bull, Just Bacon podcast. Make sure that you subscribe and follow. Thanks, guys.